Right, welcome to our next session here. So it gives me a great privilege to introduce Paul Gosling, who's the CTO of Thales UK. He's going to talk to us about future digital transformation and research activities. Once again, Paul, like a lot of our speakers, have a really varied background, not only in terms of research, but also in the business environment. He's once again quite a diverse background in terms of AI, autonomy, security, complex systems. And so forth. And being an ex-military man myself, I have some knowledge of what Thales does and some of the areas they have as well. So I'm really looking forward to this session as well. So Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So good morning, everyone. So yeah, as Mike says, I'm Paul Gosling. I'm the CTO for Thales UK. So what does that mean? It means that I look after a research group in the UK of about 350 people. We're about 7,000 people in total in the UK. About 2,500 of those are scientists and engineers. As Mike said, I've got a fairly diverse background. My initial research was in a subject called quadrupole double resonance, which was all about extracting weak signals from noise. I then started working on radar systems, sonar systems. And I think throughout my career, I would summarize my challenge is to try and find very weak signals in increasingly large amounts of noise. So I guess in the modern vernacular, you might call me a data scientist, although I guess in the past, we wouldn't have used those terms. So to take you through what I was going to talk about a little bit today, I was going to talk about some of the sort of digital research and technology applications we're looking at in Thales. Some of the challenges we face, I guess, as well. Really the importance of having an effective research ecosystem. So I was going to talk a little bit about the research ecosystem we have within the UK part of Thales. And I probably should explain that whilst we're 7,000 employees, Thales across the group is about 85,000 employees, and we spend across the group something like €1 billion a year of our own money on research. So, you know, I'm part of a much bigger enterprise there. I'll talk a little bit about the data explosion, because I think, you know, it's important to realize just how much data we're now having to deal with. And the challenges that presents as well in terms of some of the aspects around security of our data, both now and in the future. A little bit about, you know, the way we work with data and the evolving techniques and some of the things we're changing in our thinking of how we structure our systems. And then a little bit, a few examples that I'm able to share, and probably as Mike was saying, you know, there are some areas in the more sensitive defense arena that I'm not able to talk about in perhaps so much detail. So in a nutshell, what we do. So we sense and gather data, we transmit and store that data, and we process data and make decisions. And that really, in a nutshell, is a lot of what we do in Thales. And we do that in a number of sectors, digital identity and security. And for those of you who have chip and PIN cards, a UK passport or a UK driving license, and recently renewed any of those, then a lot of the digital identity and security aspects around that are done by Thales. In defense and security, we work on a lot of sensor systems, radar, sonar being my particular background, electronic warfare, and also security of systems, comm systems, etc. In the aerospace world, we're talking about in-flight entertainment systems, comm systems, flight control systems, air traffic management. Again, in space, we're talking about satellite systems, and our recent claim to fame there was some of the equipment on the Mars rover was done by us. And surprisingly as well, you might find that we also work in ground transportation. So if you go on the London Underground or Manchester Metro, the advanced signalling system that allows us to put more trains through per hour, is something that we've been working on. But in all of those cases, there's a huge amount of data being generated, a lot of information being processed, and all that is about trying to help users make decisions in the easiest possible way. So what are we really interested in? I think if you ask most CTOs what sort of things they're interested in these days, or if you look on the various government strategy papers, you will get very similar answers. I think there's a huge amount of excitement in quantum, both in terms of sensing, cryptography, communications, and the potential of computing. Particularly an area that we're very interested in is artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. There's a huge opportunity with connectivity and digital twins, and certainly the potential for both private and public 5G and ultimately 6G networks. Space we're moving we're seeing more opportunities in the space business, and not just for sort of in the civil world as well. And underpinning an awful lot of this is there's a huge amount of focus as you can imagine now, on management of our natural resources, emissions, and trying how to make systems more friendly to the environment. A lot of these things all rely on data, though. I often say, as somebody who grew up in the 60s and remember the sort of magazines that I read in those days, but you have to be a little bit careful about predictions of the future. And one of the things I've said a number of times is that if you read some of those magazines, people were talking about flying cars and all sorts of very strange things. But the one thing that I don't recall ever reading a huge amount about in the 60s was what's really happened in terms of the internet, the connectivity, the access to data, the sort of social media things. None of those things were really that well predicted, I don't think, in the past, which is why I always get nervous when I try and talk about the future. So here's a very complex picture, so I'll try and simplify it for you. We're spread around the UK in a number of areas, and we have a number of partners. I mean, on the right-hand side of this picture, we have three what we would call strategic university partners, where we invest a lot with them. And it's all about, with Cranfield, it's a lot about the future of flight and how that's going to look in the future with autonomy and with more digitally connected systems. With Southampton and Bristol universities, we're working a lot on complex systems, autonomous systems, and how those complex systems interact ultimately with human beings, where part of the problems can sometimes exist. Around the country, you can see we're pretty well spread in Northern Ireland, Glasgow, down in the southwest, southeast, etc. We have a number of experimentation facilities in autonomy. We fly large autonomous systems out of West Wales Airport. In Plymouth, we have a number of maritime autonomy systems that we're now working on for the Navy that allow the Navy to send autonomous boats out to look for mines. And then there's another layer of autonomy where the autonomous boat will then deploy unmanned underwater vehicles to go and find and destroy sea mines. So very complex systems type activities. You can see, again, it's quite an important point. I mean, we sponsor around between 50 and 60 PhDs. We've set up in partnership with South Wales, the National Defence Cyber Centre in South Wales, where we're doing an awful lot of work on how we can work in with complex systems. And overall, we work with a number of over 20 universities in the UK. And that's important, as well as our relationship with SMEs, because in this complex research world, it's very difficult to do anything on your own. You have to be working in partnership. I'll talk a bit about data because it's quite revealing. You know, in the sort of systems we operate on, we monitor data from aircraft systems, and typically a modern aircraft engine will generate 1 terabyte in 24 hours of data. If you go to petabytes, there are some of our systems that are in operation today that generate 2 petabytes of data a day, which is broadly equivalent to the sort of Facebook upload by its users. And then when you look more broadly into the future, the projections in terms of the amount of data that we're going to see is going to increase significantly. I mean, the stats I looked up on the internet the other day, about 2.5 exabytes of data being generated daily last year, with a prediction that that's going to go up to something like 463 exabytes per day by 2025. I mean, these are just crazy numbers compared to where we were at the start of my career, where kilobytes were quite useful and seen as significant amounts of data, quite frankly. But I think we have to really pay attention to data, and I mentioned a little bit about quantum. One of the areas we do work on is the area of securing our data. The quantum algorithms, quantum computers that are emerging now give us the potential to crack traditional encryption systems. And in fact, even standard computers can crack some of the old encryption systems given enough time. And so you really now need to think about not only securing your data today, but also securing your data for the future. And there's quite a simple equation attributed to Mosca, who basically says, you know, if you need your data to be secure for a certain number of years, say X, and the time it takes to retool that is Y, in order to produce a quantum safe solution, and the time it takes to build an appropriately sized quantum computer is Z, then there's a gap. There's going to be a gap, and there's going to be a period in time where if you don't think about these things today, that information won't be secure. And I think that's a sort of certainly an area that we're working on in how we secure our data, not just for today, but for the future as well. And the other area that I tried to simplify this as much as I can. We've been thinking a lot about our sensor processing chains. Traditionally, if you look at the sort of processing chains that we have in our systems today, the top of this picture shows that we normally digitize our sensor. We do some processing to signal process it. We then look at produce sort of data for the display and also to track. But what's going on in a lot of our legacy systems is we're throwing a lot of data away. We're trying to throw as much away as possible so that at the back end we can store relatively small numbers of kilobytes, gigabytes of data for historical purposes. But all that raw information, all that raw time series data that came from the sensors in the past was thrown away. So in other words, those systems have quite a short-term memory when it comes to that very early data in the chain. But in the modern conception of these systems, we're much more looking towards retaining as much data as possible in a data lake, bringing in multiple sensors, multiple information, keeping those sensors, obviously keeping the sensor processing and the user interface, but having a much broader suite of data analytics operating on that data lake, being able to go back and look into past historical data, because very often in many of our systems, certainly in the defense world, we find very, very weak signals. And then we want to go back and look at and see whether there was any evidence of those weak signals previously in historical data. So that evolution is largely brought about by the evolution of storage, and it opens up all the capabilities of those wider suites of data analytics that we can then apply to our large data lakes. So now I was probably going to talk a little bit about a few examples, if I may. So for example, in the world of AI, we've deployed a number of systems which based on a product, if you like, called Digital Crew. So essentially what this does is it does the looking for you, whether it's looking for drones, whether it's looking for people hiding in fields, whether it's looking for armored vehicles, whether it's trying to recognize individuals. It basically means that it relies on the AI, which can be trained to search for any particular objects, to do the looking for you. The AI system doesn't get tired. It basically can flag up the things of interest. It can be trained on particular aspects of these systems. And this basic principle of using AI is already well established certainly in some areas. But it does make it's an important tool in our armory now to try and be able to support human fatigue when sitting in front of screens for days and days on end. The other area I talked about is autonomy. Autonomy obviously relies to a certain extent around, we still need a lot of data around autonomy to connect to those systems. You can see a few pictures there. The one in the top left is our Watchkeeper system, and the one next to it is the maritime autonomous vehicle, which deploys the drones from it, which is the yellow, the long yellow thing there on the top of the boat. And then you see the Mars rover, you see trams, even trains. A number of train systems are basically capable of driverless operation these days. And like I talked about in terms of ecosystems, again, in the world of autonomy, we've actually set up our own autonomy research center where we can actually start to look at the core issues around autonomous systems. And frankly, one of the biggest challenges we have in this area is regulatory and societal acceptance of these systems. It's very difficult in these systems to get to go in front of a regulator and agree the principles that these things need to be following in order to be safe and secure. And that therein lies a number of the challenges that we face in terms of these next generation technologies, how we take them to regulators, how we get them approved. Another example of digital opportunities, probably in the space of looking at our future carbon footprint, and also again in the principle of taking human beings out of harm's way. This is an example from a catapult-based research activity called MIMRI. Here we're combining a number of aspects. Actually, we're using some of the optical technology we actually developed for periscopes on submarines to be able to scan rapidly the rotating blades of a wind turbine to look for faults in the blades. We use the autonomous boats that we use for mine warfare to go out and then deploy a drone, which effectively can crawl up the turbine and start to do some remote maintenance, again, without any human beings present. And all of that is also simulated within a digital twin environment in order that we can actually try and test out some of those principles in the laboratory environment. So you can see a lot of digital technologies feeding into that particular example. And the other one,
Paul, sorry, I'm afraid because of timing, I may have to stop you there. Unless there's a couple of final comments you'd like to make on what you've presented so far.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I was going to talk about predictive analytics, but I think just in terms of summary, our sensor systems are evolving. We have large data lakes. Data security is an issue. Clearly, autonomy is an area we're very, very interested in. Collaboration is something we're working in a lot of areas, and predictive analytics. So yeah, just to wrap it up there, I think that's basically the key themes from what I was trying to say.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, I've had a number of takeouts from that in terms of, it's the D word again, it's data. How do you manage data at this huge scale? And as you said there on your summary slide, how does that impact some of the different systems and different tools you'd use in any kind of an organization at the end of the day? So I'll bring this session to a close, and then I'll, as usual, click on the next feed loop session, and I'll see you there in a few minutes where we'll hear from Mark Gill. Thank you.